Welcome to my neighborhood, where I'll interview several industry luminaries and interesting people who are changing the state of the art in accounting software technology. Some of my guests are CEOs of leading corporations that you may have already heard of, maybe you're already using their products, or I think will soon be using their products, as well as some interesting thought leaders who help us learn more about technology and how to put it to use. Today we have Rene Lacerte, the founder of Bill.com, with us. He's a graduate of Stanford University with a bachelor's in economics and a master of science in industrial engineering. His first job was with Price Waterhouse, where he was a staff auditor and a senior consultant. He's also a former group product manager at Intuit, and he led the payments and payroll divisions there. He's the co-founder and CEO of PayCycle, which was later purchased by Intuit, and it won many awards, including those from PC Magazine and the Sleeter Group Awesome Add-on Awards. He's also the founder of Bill.com, which he founded in 2006, which has become one of the best places to work in the Bay Area and serves thousands of companies who use it to do their online bill payments and receivables. Welcome to the neighborhood, Rene.
I'm excited to be here, Doug. It's I've heard about the Webio process for a while and your conversations, and I'm excited to be here. Yeah. And it's such a cold day in Pleasanton. I mean, the fire.
Oh, I know.
I'm glad I got the sweater, but I was cold without the fireplace.
We're going to be sweating in here on the lights and the camera. Anyway, but thanks for joining me. I have known you for so many years. It seems like we've kind of been growing up together in the business of accounting and accounting software and all. But you've really been one of these people that I just keep watching, and we keep talking about what you're doing, how you're doing it, and I just kind of go back to some of the early times when I met you. I just wonder, like, what were you doing early in your career that kind of sent you down the path of developing software? Because that's what you do for a living and have for so long now.
It's interesting. Folks that know me know that my dad and granddad each had 4 or 5 businesses that they had started. So early on, I heard at dinner table, I heard conversations around running a company, managing cash, how do you motivate employees, how do you build a culture, and I heard those conversations. And then when I ended up working at Intuit, I started working there because of the intense focus that they had on customers and how that was embedded into the culture, especially in the early days, right? I started realizing that there was just a lot of things that I learned from dad and granddad and how I could translate that into my own company. So the combination of what I learned from dad, granddad, from Intuit, from Scott and Bill, and throwing that into my own company. So for me, it's kind of been it's a transition over time, or I guess just lots of data coming together, and then you realize, hey, I've got this product that needs to get built. And I've got this idea about how to build a company. Right. Let me go try to put the two together.
Most of us know the Lacerte name and associated with the tax product. So what's the story there? How does that connect to you?
Yeah, so the long version probably requires bottles of wine and margaritas.
Okay.
But the short version is that my grandfather I think had 7 businesses in his life, and he pretty much, whatever he wanted to do, he could start a business. He was a great salesperson and really great people person. And so he had started a business, funding a business in Florida with his brother in data processing, and it got interesting enough that he decided to get more involved, and his brother decided to go to California and do it. His brother, when he sold that business, it was Larry, who was his son, started Lacerte Tax with Phil.
I see.
And so it was, I guess they're second cousins or cousins once removed. I never know the difference between those two, but Phil and Larry started it, and so we have the same my great-grandfather is their grandfather.
I see.
So, and they've, I think hopefully people would agree with this, but every Lacerte business has always stood for great customer
it's
engagement.
got a huge brand.
Yeah, and the customer engagement is just something I learned from dad and granddad, and my guess is it's something that Phil and Larry learned from their dad, and it's just kind of part of the heritage.
Well, I think when Intuit purchased it, 15 years ago or something, they didn't remove the name.
Right.
It's had an incredible name. It's very well
kept the offices in Texas, right? They
didn't. Well, that's great. So, so you early on you were an auditor at Price Waterhouse. What was that about?
Well, that's it. The other part of the question is that so while dad and granddad were starting businesses, both grandmothers were accountants
Right.
And my great-grandfather on my grandmother's side, my dad's mother's side, was an accountant in one of the counties in Canada, one of the states up there. So there's an accounting nature to my blood, right? There's an entrepreneurial nature to what I inherited. And so when I started working at Price Waterhouse, the reason I went there is during the recruiting process in college, the only recruiter that made any sense to me was a guy named David Sweet who worked at Price Waterhouse in San Francisco. And he said, hey, sounds like you want to be an entrepreneur. The language of business is accounting. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you need to learn the language of business, and we're the best firm to help you do that. And I said, that makes good sense. So I went and worked for Price Waterhouse and started really getting an understanding of kind of the language of business. And what was interesting about being an auditor, and this does inform how I think about running a company, is that as an auditor, I went to a different company, maybe twice in a week, but at best it was 3 weeks on a job and then another job, right? So I got to see a tremendous number of companies, how they operated. And when you were an auditor, you got the open book, you get to see everything. And you can understand that there are sales-enabled cultures, there are product-enabled cultures, there are people-enabled cultures, and all of them had different impacts and results. And so I started kind of just learning, what is the type of culture that I think is best for the long-term value of a company.
So in a sense, the training you got as an auditor, and I actually did the same, where you got to deal with all those different clients, was perfect, more than an MBA's worth of training to go out and become an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think people don't realize how important culture is in building a company. Right. And the numbers tell one side of the story, but the culture tells another side. And so I didn't realize that. Nobody told me that in the recruiting process, that you're going to get to see all these different companies. But that, while I understand accounting, I think that learning informed me.
Okay, so you're running the 10 key adder back there, making sure the numbers are tying.
Right.
But your brain is focused on the culture, is what I'm hearing you say.
I didn't realize that that's what I would call it, but you would run the 10 key and you would have to put 2,000 items, and you would get down to and say, hey, this doesn't really match with what you're telling me, and you go into the CFO's office, and some people would, just basically, bulldog you into believing that they were right, and other people would actually ask questions about it. Sometimes it would end up pointing to somebody else. Right? So you just start realizing, wow, this culture, I can go in and do an audit and ask all sorts of questions, and it's great. And the company seems to be doing great. Now, this culture has great numbers, but it's just sales driven.
Yeah, I see.
Right? So you start realizing that. And I think over time, that information accumulates. And then obviously working for my parents' payroll company, working for Intuit, starting my own companies, you kind of see the impact that those values that the culture can have on long-term results.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I don't think any of us would have thought that going and tying numbers together would really lead you down the people side of it. But I guess that resonates with me, because that's really why I'm on the people side of the accounting profession too. I was doing a lot of those same kinds of very internal things, but the funnest part was going out to each client, and they all were so different. And but what was common is they still had to debit and credit stuff, and most of the time they didn't know how, and so I was there to help them and automate those things. And so, but yeah, it's those people touches that really made the most to me.
It's huge, and I remember I'm a big fan of philosophy through music, right? So I love music in general. And I remember there was one time I was auditing a company which shall remain nameless, and I had to bring in some bad news, and the song that went through my head was an Elton John song about don't shoot me, I'm the piano man, right, or whatever. And I was like, don't shoot me, I'm the auditor, right? Because there was just a lot of animosity. It's like, I'm speaking the truth. Debits and credits don't lie.
Gary Boomer, somebody we both know well, he says, a great quote I like of his is, all progress starts with the truth.
Right.
So start there, and then we'll go.
But some people say, I can't handle the truth, right? You can't handle the truth, right?
Yeah, don't bring me truth. Bring me what I want to know. So, well, that's fascinating. So you've taken those early experiences, and then when you went to Intuit, you were part of a very large organization, a lot smaller than they are now, but it still was large enough. And you were kind of right in the middle of the ladder, if you will. You were a group product manager, which is what I would consider to be the people that really make the products
Right.
what they are, and study the customers the most. So that was you. So what was that like?
I think Intuit is a great place to work. I mean, the focus that they had on a culture
Mhm.
and how that could support an organization to achieve results was probably the biggest learning I took from that.
Right.
The focus on customers was obviously, especially back then, was unique to software development, right?
Right,
The
that's when you
focus groups,
started-
the usability.
Yeah, you started the Follow Me Homes and
Yeah, we did Follow Me Homes. I actually, started things because we can always follow the customer home, where we had Follow Me lunches, where we would call a customer and we'd have 10 people around a table. We'd be eating lunch and people would ask questions of the customer, and
Yeah.
that was a way to kind of engage, right?
Right.
And we did a lot of focus groups. We did a lot of quantitative and qualitative research, and all of that kind of informed information. I think one of the challenges in that
Mhm.
culture can be, how do you go with the gut instincts, right? So
Right.
product innovation oftentimes has to happen with one person saying, I know this is going to change the world. I'm going to go do this.
Yeah, okay, so that's Steve Jobs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how do I, why
It was
ask
Scott
my-
Cook too,
It's
right? I mean,
Scott,
Scott Cook came home and saw Sydney on the dining room table, right?
Right.
And said, I got to go fix that.
That's
That's a
right.
problem I got
That's
to
right.
go fix. So how do you get that all the way down to the culture?
Yeah,
By
yeah.
the time I joined, it was 800 employees. Today it's 10,000 or something,
Something
right?
like that, yeah.
Close to it.
Yeah.
So it's just it's a challenge that any large company has, and early
Right.
on, the culture, the founder can kind of lead that
Right.
that gut instinct.
Yeah.
But that changes over time.
Yeah, well, I've, obviously do a lot of work with Intuit myself, and they're still doing these innovation workshops.
Yeah.
Where they actually will take a group of people outside the organization and help them understand the process of innovation
Right.
in a large organization, and how to essentially crowdsource the process of innovation. And but back on the Steve Jobs point is, he said, one of my favorite quotes of his is, why would I ask my customers what they want? They can't possibly know until I show it to them.
Yeah. So that's a great quote. I mean, I think it's a really hard thing to expect your customers to know exactly where they want to go, right?
Right.
And so one of the things that I've often thought about, and the analogy that I've used and what's become part of my lexicon, is a jigsaw puzzle. And this
Mhm.
happened with the kids when they were young.
Right.
And we would do jigsaw puzzles, because I never really did that many as a kid, but we would do them. And I started learning how that you do them. Is you start with the corner pieces,
Mhm.
and then you start with the edge pieces, right? And then you start working your way in.
Yeah.
And so if you think about building a company, right?
Right.
There's no way a customer, I can tell you, Doug, when I build this thing, it's going to look like this.
Yeah.
And you could say, I love it, right?
Yeah.
And you can believe it.
Right.
But if I just say, I'm starting this thing, and I got this little thing in this corner over here, and that's what I'm starting with. For us, it was bill payment when I
Right.
first told you about it, right?
Right.
And then we added receivables, and then we
Mhm.
added, the document management, I guess, came before the receivables, right?
Right.
But then we added all the sync, and then you've got all these pieces in the middle, and it starts coming together. That vision becomes clearer
Right.
about what it is that we're doing, and then customers start saying, I get it, I
Yeah,
need
yeah,
that. So I think what's hard is, as a founder, right, it's hard sometimes to describe that vision with all
Right.
these little pieces so that a customer gets it. So you can't
Well-
ask them.
Well, if I want to be a founder of a company because I got an idea, do I have to know it all, the whole vision, or do I just get started? Like, how much do you feel one needs to know about what they're gonna do before they really write a plan and go start getting money and hiring people and doing it?
I think the first thing I would say is the level of conviction you have around and passion you have around solving the problem matters most, right? You don't have
Mhm.
to, I did not have an entire plan about every step of the roadmap that we
Right.
followed. Now, in this particular case, for both PayCycle and Bill.com, the vision of what it is that we were doing hasn't changed too much. It changed more for PayCycle
Right.
than Bill.com. Bill.com, I took out a business card the other day that was one of the original, the one that I went down to Kinko's to make, the one
Yeah.
before it was FedEx, right?
Right.
And it said, Cashview, name of the company back then.
Which I love that name
It's a great
still,
name.
by the
It's-
way.
well, we still own it. So.
You still own it.
Yeah. It said automating payables, receivables, and cash management.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing 8 years later. So
that's
we
great.
haven't changed
Right.
that, whereas PayCycle, we actually did make a few turns and got more focused on the accountant end of the product and then
Yeah.
the SMB end, which we weren't focused originally on.
Yeah. Well, so again, go back to the person that kind of watches you and like I do so much, and they see what you've done, but they don't really see what it took to do what you do. Why don't you start with, you already talked about the passion around a problem. So you had a passion, I assume, about payroll, but that wasn't new. Your passion was the cloud. So, like, what do I need to have in order to know that I've got something that's really going to be big?
So I think for PayCycle, part of the reason I started the company was it felt like I'd had enough experience. If I was going to start a company, it was a good time to do it, right? And so while I had passion around making payroll simpler for people and making it more affordable for businesses, that wasn't as much a driving force, right? It was me just saying it's time for me to grow and go try this. I've got a history of people doing this. Whereas with Bill.com, it really was a pain point that I felt. I did not feel the pain point in payroll. I was a group product manager responsible for it.
You didn't do payroll.
I didn't, right? I mean, I went out and watched people do it,
Yeah.
but I didn't actually do it, right? And then when I started PayCycle, the first thing I did is I started doing payroll by hand, so I could actually learn, all the painful steps along the way for half a dozen customers, right? And that informed a lot of the great product features that we ended up building. And for Bill.com, I was paying the bills, I was doing the collections, I was doing all that by hand, so that just kind of came naturally. But I think that the passion around the problem that you're solving has to be matched, if not, it needs to be greater to have a passion around building a culture in a company that's going to be successful.
Yeah.
Because every problem you attack, there's going to be ups and downs, and if you're not focused on building a place that rolls with the punches, that has fun doing that, then you're not going to have fun.
Yeah.
Right.
And you really won't get there.
You won't. Yeah. So we defined our values. I had a set of values that I had defined before I started the company. We defined them with the early employees. We've looked at them since, and we bring them up in company conversations and meetings, and it just kind of guides how you build a company.
Yeah.
And what you're true to, right?
Yeah.
You have to have your true north.
Yeah.
So.
A little bit back on yourself a little bit. Hobbies, skills, or something that kind of you use to blow off steam, or that you've used to actually excel and push what you're doing professionally?
Yeah, so I've got 2 young boys, and obviously the family life's really important, and making sure I have enough time with Joyce and the boys. And it's fun to watch them grow, and they're both avid swimmers, and they both are talented at stuff that like all kids, they have their talents. It's just fun to watch that. So I would say that's probably my most important hobby, right?
Yeah.
If you call
Being
it a
a dad.
hobby, right? I mean, it's a full-time job.
So
But then, what I do last steam, I play ultimate frisbees on Tuesdays, and it's just a tremendous amount of fun to get out there and not to think about anything other than, can I catch that frisbee? Can I throw that frisbee? And it's an hour, and it's engaged with other people, but yet it's really something that has nothing to do with what the rest of my life is. So that is great. I'm a huge runner. I run 35 to 40 miles a week, and so that's helped. And I've only started doing that in the last 15 months, and that's just changed how I think about a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so.
Do you find exercise changes your mental state?
I do. There definitely are endorphins that you get from it, but more for me, there's a type of meditation that I can get into when I'm running. I'm not obviously I'm watching the pebbles and rocks as I'm running the hills, right? I'm watching that stuff, but I relax enough that if thoughts from the company or stresses come from the company come in, I let them go and quickly push them out. So there's a lot of stuff going through, but it's allowing me to kind of relax. I don't go with headphones. I'm listening for the birds. I'm trying to enjoy nature the way it was intended to be enjoyed. And I find that creates a balanced perspective. It's one of the reasons I like to do the dishes at home. That if I can do one thing that made the world a better place today, that I'm confident did, right? Like all the stuff you do in building a company,
you're not sure.
You're not sure at that moment, right?
Yeah.
Did I motivate the employees today, or did I demotivate them? You're not sure. You have a plan, right? But if I do the dishes, I know I helped the family, right? If I go for a run, I know I helped me personally, right? So keeping hold of a couple of those things that can keep you, honest, then I think it helps you balance all the other challenges that you have.
So, talk about some of the difficulties in your life that you had to really overcome or change or jump over. How do you deal with adversity, and what comes to your mind when that happens?
I think adversity is just a fact of life, right? I mean, it happens, and so I'll give a metaphor. When I was living in Florida, I was raised in Florida, and was looking at colleges, and ended up coming out to California. There was a lot of concern in the family about, there's earthquakes there, and are you going to make it? What if there's a big earthquake and building falls on you and die, right? And the aha that I had was in Florida, and it's gotten worse with the weather patterns that we've been having, but in Florida, when I was a kid, the grocery bags had a map of the Atlantic Ocean from Africa to Florida, so you could track a hurricane, right? Because back then you didn't have the web, you didn't have the real-time ability, so you had to track it. So the grocery bags were helping you plan for something that you had a very small chance of ever happening, right? Whereas earthquakes, it's like, if the building starts coming down as we're filming this, you and I will find a way to deal with it, right?
Or not.
Or not,
That'll
right?
be fine too.
Right, and so I think for me, planning, for the worst is not ever good, right? So when the worst happens, dealing with it. That's why I brought the analogy. Dealing with it and kind of honestly making it comfortable to talk about. So we could talk about 2008 when I had to lay off 40% of the employees, right? It was not a great day. It was an awful thing to have to do. But the way we did it was with honesty. We explained some macroeconomic trends that were going on. We dove into what that meant from the microeconomic level that was going on in the valley and with the company, and everybody got it. We were all sad, but everybody got it. And so then when we made the decisions, people said, I get it. So when you talk about adversity, the way I think you have to do it, whether it's personal, and there's plenty of personal stuff I can get into, you just have to accept it, but you have to create all the picture so that you can accept it, and then you move forward.
So have you ever fired yourself from a job?
It's a great question. You have to do this job, you have to be willing to do that, right? And you have to be willing to look at, are you the right person for the company at that point in time in its history? And so the answer is, I guess I would say yes, to be, I might have said kind of, but if you're asking for a yes, no, I would say yes. So at PayCycle, we were growing rather fast, and there were a number of challenges that I was learning how to kind of solve for the first time. And I went to the board, and we talked about it, and we all agreed that it was time to bring in a new CEO that could help us get through those challenges. And so then I actually led the search, brought in Jim, and then I actually gave him all the information that I had, and then I stayed on as a CFO to try to help out.
And helped,
exactly.
So
but I didn't fire myself in one day. It was like,
Of course, but that still took courage to recognize that you're not king, and that to make the company succeed, or whatever the goal was, bringing help that you used to do yourself was in need.
It's interesting because a lot of people, as the founder, right, they will refer to me as your company. And I think probably at PayCycle, I mean, one of the things I've been changing is that there's still some of it that is mine. At PayCycle, I think I probably was more on the side of saying, no, this is the investors, this is the employees. But it's all three, right? I mean, it's the founder's vision, right? So it's always, that part's always going to be, the company's always going to be kind of my company. But there's no company, I've raised a lot of money. There's no company without the investors. There's no company or product without all the employees. So it's our company. And if you think that way, then you have to step outside the box and say, am I the right person?
Look at the whole problem. So talk about raising money. If I'm going to go and start a business, do I want to go get money first? Or do I want to wait until I'm really almost, bankrupt? Or how would I fund a new startup in, I'll go ahead and narrow it down, in technology, in the accounting software world? How would I start that?
I think some of it is a lot of questions that I would want to answer. Is like how big is the pain point that you're solving? How hard is it to solve that? You know, how much capital do you have? How important is it for you to make a salary? You know, there are advantages, you know, from a venture-backed business or, you know, investor-backed business, and there are disadvantages, right? And so you have to be comfortable with that. And so I think for me, you know, I felt like the problem that we were solving, both with PayCycle and Bill.com, was really big and really hard, and the market was limited, right? I mean, when I started Bill.com, we weren't even calling it the cloud then, and that was only 7.5 years ago, right? It wasn't called the cloud, it wasn't called SaaS, so, you know, there just really wasn't a name to it. Though the technology was there, and people were saying, wow, this is an interesting platform to use to build.
So we're defining a space, not only a product to fill the space, but the space itself.
Exactly, and so that happens in a period of time, and so then you think, other people are going to get this idea, so you want to move fast, right? So it kind of depends on how hard the problem is. You know, I did start both companies with my own money in the sense that I had no salary for a period of time. I, you know, got the first office space with my own dollars. But as soon as I got into employees, you know, at least in Silicon Valley, it's expensive. You know, it takes a pretty big check to do that yourself. And so that's why I've always gone out. So I would say, don't raise money until you know what it is that you're doing and have a lot of conviction around it. If you're still kind of figuring out the market, then you definitely shouldn't. And then once you have that conviction and what you know, then it really gets into, you know, how big is the market, how much money you're going to need. Because investors, you know, the VC community, for example, will have very high expectations. You know, they're betting on the $1 billion opportunities more than the $10 million opportunities. So if you look at your market and your software and you think, I see a path to building a $10 million revenue company, you know, that is great. Maybe try to do that on your own, because VCs are going to say, how's that 10 million really $1 billion in revenue? And they're going to have expectations and check-ins along the way to make sure.
So how do I pitch a venture capitalist?
I'm married to a VC, right? So I have fortunate training from that perspective.
This is Joyce, his wife Joyce, and wonderful lady, and she's garage.com, I think it is, right?
Exactly, So I have plenty of training, pillow talk, so to speak, that helps me pitch. But you know, ultimately what I've learned through the hundreds of pitches that I've done is that VCs really look at kind of three requirements. One is, how big is the market? Is it they call it total addressable market. How big is the TAM? How big is that opportunity? The second would be, you know, how strong is you know, kind of the management team, and in particular, you know, when they're looking at the person who's asked them for money, what's their confidence?
It's very much about your resume, right?
Yeah, the resume and the ability to kind of deliver that passion into product, right? And the third would just be the roadmap and execution plan that you have, right? But ultimately, it's those three things that they would be betting on, and people is, you know, the people is probably the most important thing. So when you say, how do you pitch a VC, you want to be able to go in and show that you're the right person for the job, that you understand the market, that you know how to build a company, that you're you know, you're thoughtful about that stuff.
Yeah, it sort of comes to mind though that there's some 22-year-olds out there getting venture money.
There are plenty.
It's not that rare.
The market is very frothy, and that's the VCs even talk about it. And some people say that's the time where people should probably not be making investments, because people aren't. Yeah, it's not that they're getting money. It's great that the 22-year-olds are getting money. Yeah. It's just the amounts that they're getting may not be reasonable, right? Because you get a large amount. If you don't know how to spend it and execute it, it can create problems later.
Does it feel like we might be in a bubble again, like in the early 2000s?
You know, it feels different. There's something bubble-ish about this, right? But
we're certainly in a euphoric period.
Yeah, it feels. But I guess what's different for me is that the business models behind the companies are much stronger and more sound.
Right, and they're more scrutinized now, given the lessons that we learned in the early 2000s. So tell me what the hardest thing about being a working parent is. How do you balance the being a parent thing, which I know is so important to you,
Right.
and this huge job you have. How do you do it?
I think the hardest challenge is second guessing yourself as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And as a kid, right? I mean, again, I'll bring in some music. Cats in the Cradles,
Mm-hmm.
right? Harry Chapman, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the song's all about how a son wants to play with the dad doesn't have time, son goes off to college, son comes back, dad has time, son doesn't want to play with
anymore.
dad,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's the second guessing that I have. That's, to me, is the biggest challenge. So I do make sure that, I go to the swim meets and I'm there, and I go to the play performances, and
Right.
I go to everything that I can.
Yeah.
But it still doesn't feel like it's enough, right? Because there's so much more that happens outside. So then I actually talk about it with the kids. So
Mhm.
I'm actually very open about it, saying, this is why Daddy works hard,
Right.
and this is important for us as a family. It's important for the employees. It's important for
Right.
the investors, and this is why when I'm with you, it's so important that we have good quality time. And so let's
Mhm.
focus it on that. So we have those conversations, and we've had them since
Yeah.
they were 5.
I've met your sons. They're incredible.
Thank you.
I was actually struck by the amount of respect and, well, I hesitate to use the word maturity, but it's sort of what I see from them as 10 years old
Yeah.
or something. And it was your oldest, and it's clear to me that whatever you're doing there is working. Both of them are very clear about some things that I don't think people get clear until they're 20,
Uh-huh.
and they seem to be quite on task, and they're more interested in improving themselves than playing in many ways, although they seem to play a lot as well. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think that's one of the benefits I got out of being an auditor. Bring it back to that,
Right.
was seeing the importance of defining values.
Right,
So we, Joyce and I, before we had kids, defined family values.
right,
And we would talk about them every now and then we just had a nice summer vacation last summer, and we took the kids, and in one of our dinners, we took 3 hours, and I said, we're going to talk about the values, and I had my iPhone out, and
right.
we went through and talked about the values that were important to them. And then you try to bring it back. When they're doing something that doesn't fit, you kind of say, you're not respecting. And I let them say it to me, Dad,
Right.
you're not respecting me right now. Or you're not
Mhm.
respecting Mommy,
Sure.
right? Or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but that's
Call it
hopefully
like
is
you
what's
see it.
helping
Yeah.
them do well. So thank you for saying
Yeah.
that. It's great.
Yeah.
Obviously for a dad, it feels great.
Yeah, there's a quote that I saw you put on, actually at your home. It was those who, I'm trying to remember it, those who do only that which is required will forever be enslaved by those who do not.
So that's a great quote, and I learned that in high school from a teacher named William Armstrong, and I think it's either Hesiod or Euripides that said it, but the exact quote is, those who do only what is required of them are a slave. The moment they do more, they are a free man, right? And so the point, and the reason that's on the board in the kids' room, is just to say, if you only do what's required, you're not reaching your potential. One of the things I've talked about with the kids, because we're thinking about private schools right now, is I've said, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
You're good kids, right? But you have a choice in life if you want to be exceptional.
Mm-hmm.
But there's work in that,
Yeah.
right? And so that's kind of what that quote's about. And actually, the other quote is, before the gates of excellence, the high gods have placed sweat,
Yes.
right? So they kind of go hand in hand. And this
Yeah.
teacher had them up on his wall,
Yeah.
and you would go in for, it was great, you'd go in for class, and you would see that the quotes were turned around, and you
Mhm.
knew, crap, I better have that one memorized. So
What does it say?
so they're still memorized 35 years later,
Yeah.
right? So
Well, anyway, thank you so much for being with me in the neighborhood, and I hope to see you real soon.
Okay, you
Thank
bet, Doug. Thank
See
you.
ya.
So thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you next time.